All right, well, welcome everybody to this morning or indeed this afternoon's webinar, depending on where you're listening from. I'm really excited about today's webinar. We've got a fantastic guest for you, but we're going to get to him in a moment. Just for those who don't know, I'm Jim Preen, Crisis Management Director at Udo Sentinel, and we make crisis management and crisis communication software. I'm delighted to say, as you can see on the slide, that today's webinar is presented in conjunction with the BCI. It's part of their Education Month, and their Education Month this year, as you can see, is all about embedding business continuity for a more resilient future. The BCI has over 8,000 members in more than 100 countries and is the world's leading resilience organization. Today, I assume you all know that we're talking about digital communications, but before we get into that, it's a bit of a tradition on my webinars for those listening in to post in the Q&A box where you're listening from. So could you go ahead and do that now? Where are you listening from? Which town, which city, which country are you listening from? We sometimes get quite a worldwide audience here, and it's fun to see where you're listening from. Well, good Lord, look at that straight away. Gregory from Canberra, Australia. I'm sitting here in London, and there we have Gregory from Australia. We've got Jane from Manchester. We've got Maria from Kent and Philippines. Rico, welcome. Who else have we got here? Oh, we got Suffolk, Virginia. Okay, we got Jeff there. Juliana from London, near me. Oh, lots of Americans. It's excellent. Ruthel from New Jersey. Will from Glasgow. Gibraltar. I'm not sure. Ian, I'm delighted you're here. I don't think we've ever had anyone from Gibraltar before. That's a new one for me. Rochester, Danny. Yeah, okay, Dan. Good to see you there. And British Columbia. Rich. Wow, this is fantastic. And Malaya as well. Malaysia. I beg your pardon. Sorry, Malaysia. East Sussex, Christopher, Birmingham, yeah. I'm not going to read. Oh, South Africa as well. Well, Tim, I haven't introduced you yet, but you see, you see what we do here. What an amazing audience that is. And Anu from India as well. And yeah, and we got David. David, you seem to, I don't know where you're listening from. Yeah, anyway, there we go. That's what's happening right now. So talking of questions, a bit of a trick on my part here to get you to use that, because we want you to use that question and answer box, because I'm going to be seeking questions and answers from my guest, but I want questions and answers. I want questions and suggestions from you, which I can then put to our guest today. So that's what's happening. I like to make these as interactive as possible. Obviously, I'm seeking my guests' thoughts and opinions, but I want yours as well. And talking of my guest, finally, Tim, you must be wondering when I'm going to get to you. But I'd like to introduce Tim. I'm hoping that you can hear me. I think you can hear me. I'm going to put up a little bit of information about you here on the slide, which hopefully you can see. But Tim, it's a lot more about you than is written there. Could you just introduce yourself briefly to our audience, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for dialing in. My name's Tim Lloyd. I own a company called Social Simulator, and we help our clients to think about the way that they're using digital communications for positive reasons, and also in an emergency as well. But my background, as the slide says, is in journalism. I used to work on local newspapers after I left school as a writer and reporter, and then through a kind of quirk of fate, ended up on the other side of the fence in digital communications, as it was then called, in different government departments in the UK. And that was a great time to be there, because it was a great time of change, both politically and in terms of the progress of digital communications. And that's what got me into the business that I run today.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks so much for that. Tim, just a quick question so that we're all on the same page here. Maybe this seems like a dumb question, but can we just establish what you mean by digital communications? It's kind of quite a broad church, isn't it?
You're right, and it's not a dumb question, because actually I think this is something that'll come out as we progress our conversation. But for me, digital communications is everything from the website that belongs to your organization, through all the transactions that your customers have with you online, finishing up with the kind of traditional digital communications channels, your social media, your email marketing, for example, and internal comms channels as well. So your chat, your intranet, any kind of internal tools, Slack for those of you that use that, that's all digital communications as well.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm sure we will be talking a lot about this as we go ahead anyway, and so the picture hopefully will become clearer as we do. Now, before I put my first question to Tim, I've got some questions for you guys as well. I'm going to launch a series of polls throughout today's event. And my first poll here, I'm going to launch this now, and I really hope you will vote on these polls for us, because it sparks some interesting conversations, and that's why I'm running these polls. So please, could you vote on this now? Okay, people are voting. Here we go. The numbers are going up. So which department do you work in? Do you work in internal comms, external comms, both internal and external, or perhaps you don't work in comms at all? What have we got? 67%. Come on, folks. A few more people can dive in and answer our poll question here. Where are we up to? 78%. Can we get a little bit higher? Okay, up to 80%. Okay, last dibs on this, folks. I'm going to close this poll and I'm going to launch the results. Okay, I'm closing the poll now and I'm sharing the results, and hopefully, well, yeah, I don't know, Tim, what do you think? I'm a little bit surprised that the majority of people here actually do not work in comms. Now, I don't know whether this is true, and maybe someone can tell me this on the Q&A form. I have a suspicion it might be that as this is part of Education Month, people perhaps would like to work in comms but haven't made the jump to working in comms yet. Is that true? If anybody wants to answer that question. So I guess with that in mind, and unless I'm completely off beam on this, Tim, do you have any sort of brief thoughts about how you can get into comms? I guess working in journalism is one way in. Certainly was the way I got in as well.
Yeah, that's the kind of traditional route. But actually, I think if you're already in an organization but perhaps not in the comms team, taking an active interest in what communications does, getting involved in perhaps a couple of joint projects and that sort of thing is often a really good way to move across. And also the sort of digital route as well. Maybe you're looking after a piece of technology for the company that you're working in, a transaction of some sort, customer service, anything where you've got I think an understanding about the audience actually is probably key, and the passion for it.
And as people are already putting questions and thoughts in the box here, saying that a lot of people here may not specifically work in comms, but their business continuity. There's the key. I guess the key is in the name. We are talking about business continuity and crisis management here. So yeah, what was this? Simon says, I work in business continuity. Comms is just a means to an end. I don't know, but belittling comms there a bit, Simon. I'm not sure if I approve of that. And Mary is saying, interested as a BC manager and how comms integrates in BC management. Well, that's a really good point. But so a lot of good points there. Okay, I'm just going to hide those results there. And I'm going to go to my first question to you, Tim, which hopefully people can see there, and it's a pretty obvious one. You started out as a journalist, and I've heard it said that when dealing with a crisis, when dealing with the press in a crisis, it's helpful to think like a reporter. Does that resonate with you at all, that thought?
Yeah, I think that still holds true, but I would suggest that if you've gotten to the crisis or the emergency and only then you're thinking like the media, like a reporter, then it's probably a bit too late. I think what is interesting is how media's changed, and I think this is important to understand regardless of whether you work in communications or not. So without casting aspersions, Jim, but when you and I started our career in media and we wanted to go and get
Are
stories,
you
we probably,
suggesting I'm old? Is that this is a polite way of suggesting I'm old, Tim? Go
not
ahead,
as old
sorry.
as me, but we had to sort of go and knock on doors and ask awkward questions at public meetings, talk to people directly to pick up any kind of information at all, and maybe a little bit of early 1.0 Googling. But now we've got two problems. One is media organizations are incredibly underfunded and they've sort of struggled to keep pace. So there's less journalists than ever working to cover a much wider range of channels and content formats and that sort of thing. But we've also got more information publicly available online. So from a business continuity point of view, I think it's really important that people understand the role of digital comms, not in reacting, but in anticipating where your problems come from. And for some organizations, that means if you've got data that's publicly available online or shouldn't be publicly available online, that's going to be where a stressed, desk-bound, under-resourced journalist is going to find their next story. So yeah, you do need to think like a reporter, but you need to think about like a reporter in 2021 who is going to go and get the story from whatever they can find out about your organization online.
And so that makes obviously the digital presentation, the comms that you put out on your website or online. I mean, that is one of the things that, you know, I think we learned years ago that if you do have a crisis, if you do have a problem, it must be reflected on your website. It must be reflected in how you respond, right?
Yeah, right. And also know that, you know, the information that you put out in good faith could be manipulated. Digital comms is also the place where even when there's nothing going on, no problems of any sort, digital comms is the function, if you like, that monitors what people are saying and publishing online and might help you anticipate where things are going wrong. And, you know, customer reviews and that sort of thing are a classic example of digital communications before the emergency, before the crisis. And that's why it's important, I think, to understand from a business continuity point of view, and to that earlier comment about comms being a means to an end, it's kind of too late. You know, digital comms is a proactive early warning system. That's probably the best way of thinking of it.
Yeah. Okay. Great stuff. All right. Let's move on to my next question now. You've done quite a lot of work and still do, as I understand it, with the UK government. I think that's particularly with civil servants, is that right? Or do you
That's right,
work with
yeah.
this? Yeah. So you worked at the Departments of Health and Business. What were the challenges there? You know, do you have any examples? Do you have any thoughts about, you know, that you can share with us about your time working in those departments, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, firstly, I should say it's the most incredible experience, and I owe the UK civil service experience a lot of credit for what I do now. But you know, the challenges were quite broad, and I think they still are, although things have moved on since I worked there. But for example, when I was at Department of Health, I joined just before in the UK we had a swine flu pandemic. Now, in hindsight, that's a really quaint, very sort of localized.
It wasn't quaint.
Not
It wasn't quaint at the time, though, was it? You know?
right. It
Yeah.
was a big deal. It felt like a big deal at the time, and digital communications was still kind of in its infancy. I think for any government around the world, but in the UK as well. There's a website and there's a bit of proactive tweeting and that sort of thing, but it wasn't the kind of mass weapon that it can be now to help in a situation. So we were struggling to find the right Wi-Fi in the right building to just simply
Right.
connect.
Yeah.
And I think enough time's elapsed. My former colleagues aren't going to get into any trouble, but we had, you know, someone's router brought in from home, plugged into an internet connection in the floor of an office on Whitehall because we couldn't get sufficient connectivity in a comms office part of the building. So we were using that to get our social media out.
But Tim, if I may say so, I mean, that's really reflected in our current experience, isn't it? I'm working from home right now. You're in a hotel room. I've got my home Wi-Fi router here. I'm sure that wasn't ever designed for business. So in a way, it's because of the pandemic and because of lockdowns, we are using sort of domestic routers and so forth. And that is probably not really where we want to take this discussion now, but we're kind of back in that position right now.
Yeah, well, I think like all these things push a change in technology and how we think of it and how we use it. So again, back in sort of swine flu days, we were using our own phones. There was, the lag in terms of governance of the hardware that we use, the channels that we use, was all sort of lagging behind. So that was quite an interesting time.
Were you using Twitter then? Was Twitter a thing? Because I mean, I would assume that would be a big channel you would use now in similar circumstances.
Definitely, yeah. It was very much a sort of a broadcast tool at that time, as were most social media channels for most organizations. But it was really useful, and I think that was probably the catalyst, or a catalyst for UK government in terms of its use of social media. Thereafter, the gates opened, and it became a much more kind of important part of our sort of portfolio of communications channels.
So working with the departments of health and business, now that there are so many more channels, how is that reflected in how would that be reflected in your work? Because I know you still do work for the government now.
Yeah, well, I think these days, it's much better integrated. Instead of it being one team sort of slightly sat in the corner and usually a little bit under-resourced, digital cuts through most other communications disciplines. There's better budgets for it. There's greater recognition for digital. So I mean, I think in all honesty, it's changed a huge amount. I suspect though that it's still a kind of a servant function to press office, and this is not just a government thing, but I think most big organizations, private or public, are still worried about tomorrow's headlines on or offline. And sometimes that's not a true reflection on how a customer base or a particular community are feeling. And that's still the piece of the puzzle that's missing.
Yes, I mean that's an interesting point, because I mean the thing that's really changed, I think, in my days when I was a journalist, it's much more of a two-way conversation these days. It used to be that PR would put out a statement or something, journalists would pick it up and broadcast it to the rest of the world. But with the advent of Twitter, with the advent of sort of two-way conversations, it's quite a different environment that we work in now. Would you agree with that, Tim?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, expectations around customer service, for example, are huge. And most people on the call now, I'm willing to bet, will have complained online at some point or another. Not just Twitter, but you've left a negative review on TripAdvisor or whatever the review site is in the country that you live and work, or you've complained over Messenger or something like that. So I expect to find every single organization that I interact with online somewhere, and I expect to be able to communicate with them.
Yeah.
In the good times and the bad times, whatever challenges they're going through, that's where I expect to find them.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Well, I'm going to communicate with our listeners right now, because I'm going to launch another poll. Give you a break here, Tim. And here's let me just launch this poll here. Here we go. I'm going to launch this poll. So here's the next question for you. Has the pandemic, has COVID and all the fallout from that forced us to look at comms in a different way? Will crisis management plans, will business continuity plans have to change as a result of COVID? Or is, as I hesitate to say COVID going away, because it doesn't actually seem to be doing that, but is everything just going to slip back to normal? So, all right, we're getting quite a few votes here. Okay, keep on voting, folks. And of course, what I'm also going to ask you is if you think it is going to change, what those changes might be. What changes should be reflected in your business continuity plans? What changes should be reflected in your crisis management plans or playbooks? Okay, folks, 72% of people have voted. We'd like to get a little bit more than that, please. Can we get it up to 80? Do you think that crisis comms has changed? Are things different now, and will it have to change in your plans? Okay, folks, we're going to get last dibs on this. Does anybody else want to vote? We're up to 80 now. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share the results with you. So the overwhelming majority of people think that that comms, we do have to look at comms in a different way, and that crisis plans will have to change. And as I say, folks, I'd really like you to put some comments in how you think this change will manifest itself. Tim, back to you. Do you have any thoughts on this, on how comms may change because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's sort of front of mind for everyone. I think, though, without yet getting into, you know, who has and hasn't done a good job, the big issue I think is around, you know, accountability. So the speed with which we can understand how a country or community is impacted by a virus is really, really important, and then communicating those numbers, you know, honestly and transparently, and in a way that people can kind of vaguely comprehend or understand. So a bit like we were saying with customer service earlier, our expectations are higher now. In the UK, we had a period of regular daily press briefings, which is not something I don't think we'd ever had historically. You know, almost
Well,
sort of on
I'm
a
old enough
wartime.
to remember the Falklands War, and we used to get it there, but that's a long, long time
Right,
ago.
right. Okay,
Sorry,
that's a
Tim.
really good example. No. So I think transparency and accountability are sort of two really big ways in which communications has changed. And of course, digital comms has a really, you know, a really important role to play in that, in helping us understand how well a country, a government, or even a business is coping during a pandemic.
Indeed, and we're getting some good points here from people. John is saying comms need to keep staff updated more frequently. Crisis plans should follow government guidance and advice and change quickly. I guess you'd probably go along with that. Increase in remote working means different ways of reaching out and sharing information with employees and key stakeholders. And obviously the other aspect of that is, the other side of that is, people working from home need to have the right training and the right equipment to be able to do their job efficiently. The change, now who's this? This is Yusuf. The change, I believe, in one respect is due to combating the rise of fake news and relating to vaccinations. Well, funnily enough, earlier, in fact, last week I was on a panel talking about fake news, which was a BCI thing. So I would suggest that you guys, if you're BCI members, which you probably are, check out the fake news panel that we did last week, because there's a lot of information about that. Maybe that's something we want to talk about. Just quickly going through these points here. Working from home as the norm presents a lot of IT and security issues. Certainly that's true. Also, well-being as colleagues work remotely becomes a factor of BC. That's a great point too. And it's never been an issue before, so keeping it in touch through a variety of platforms becomes integral to BC plans. Mary, that's excellent. I totally endorse what you're saying there. Tony is saying comms has to be seen as a proactive tool for the C-suite to use to keep stakeholders and staff informed. And David, Hackney had a major cyber attack in the middle of COVID, and I remember that as well. The town hall was hacked there. I remember, I think I wrote something about it. So good points there. Tim, anything from that you want to pick up on, or are we good with that?
I just endorse the internal comms piece. I think this is hopefully the moment where internal comms finally gets the recognition it should have had for a very long time, and the
Yeah,
profile.
I always make the point when this arises, or when an emergency or crisis arises, that people are always very worried about external stakeholders. But I'm of the firm belief that comms starts at home, if you will, and actually communicating with your staff initially is the most important thing. I mean, you may need to do both, but internal comms in a crisis, I think, it's your staff who are going to get you through whatever the crisis might be. And what you don't want is them picking up a lot of fluff and stuff on social media, which is not relevant. So they need good, dispassionate advice from. So I'm doing too much talking here, Tim. It's you that should be doing the talking. So next question. Now you're a consultant, and I think you work at the Cabinet Office. And I've been a consultant for many years, and I'm quite interested to hear how that dynamic works. Sometimes being a consultant and coming in, you can hit a bit of resentment and kept at arm's length, but I'm sure you're not. My question is it difficult for an outsider to make a presence felt? And the other question there is, have you worked on pandemic comms? Because that's in everybody's mind. Sorry, a bunch of questions there for you, Tim.
Okay,
Pick up
that's okay.
whichever you wish there.
Well, we're a team of consultants, I suppose, and the advantage we have is that we're usually always coming in to deliver a specific project, and it's usually skills training, and our whole USP is about practical skills training as well. So I think if you talk to anyone and say we're going to help you get better at something, or we want to help you solve a particular day-to-day problem, then most of the time that's fairly sort of welcome, I think. And personally, one of the things I've really enjoyed about the past sort of 7 years or so now, working with the Cabinet Office and in other places as well, is that actually having an outside voice inside, as it were, you often get heard a little bit more closely than when I was internal and writing lots of papers and making bids for bits of budget and new projects and that sort of thing. You tend to sort of have a lot more impact a lot more quickly coming from an external point of view, and that's really useful from a sort of a business continuity and preparedness point of view, because it gives you a license to come in, make some very clear, hopefully reasonably evidence-based recommendations, and follow through with the kind of practical changes that are needed to make a plan better and more actionable should the worst happen. So that kind of external perspective, and coming from that external perspective, I find it even easier than when I worked on the inside.
In my experience, it can cut both ways, but I'm pleased to hear you say that. That's
fair
great.
enough. Yeah.
Now, something really interesting has come up here, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, Tim. Renee has come up with a really interesting point. We have already created more WhatsApp groups for emergency incident and amended the comms process flow and our BC plans. Now, what's your thought about this? Because I have some thoughts on this. What do you think about using WhatsApp in an emergency, in a crisis?
I don't really have a problem with it. I think there is always this sort of tussle about what platform should we or should we not be using to communicate. And I very firmly believe what will win is the platform that we as individuals are most happy using day to day. And that's what's amazing about WhatsApp. Or for some of you dialing in from parts of Asia, you'll be using Line, Telegram, WeChat, perhaps as an equivalent. That will always win out. And when we go and do exercises and the IT team say to us, I know everyone's got to use WebEx or everyone's got to use Teams or whatever it might be, fine, but unrealistic. The technology is way ahead of kind of corporate IT, corporate governance, and generally it's way ahead of business continuity plans as well. So adoption always comes back to whatever we've got in our pockets, whatever we're happiest using. And no one apart from WeChat for example, can match WhatsApp for ease of use and low barrier to entry. So that's what we're going to pick up in an emergency.
I totally hear you, but can I put a contrary view to you, Tim? I totally get it, because we all know how to use WhatsApp. We all use it with our families and friends and so forth. Well, I suppose I should speak for myself, but I certainly do. But my opinion is, and I know it's an uphill battle, and you can tell people that they should use other platforms, but you know, people will use what they use, and I get that. But there are problems with WhatsApp. The major one is that there's no corporate oversight. That nobody, if people don't want to share their conversations with the company, they don't have to, and they, you know, it's not immediately evident. And there are all these stories about people who are in WhatsApp groups. They go to work for a competitor, keep their mobile phone, and are still in a WhatsApp group from the people that they used to work at. And also in a crisis, if people perhaps are not happy about a decision they took, it can be deleted. So it's not an ideal tool for any kind of post-crisis evaluation. So that would be my hesitancy in using WhatsApp in a crisis. But I'm fully aware of just telling people not to use it. You're on a bit of a hiding to nothing, but I do think it's not a perfect tool for managing a crisis.
No, I agree. But I think this is an issue about organizations and the trust that they have in staff, and accepting that, you know, the world's changed. You know, we're networked in a way that was unimaginable even 10 years ago, and I just don't think there's a sort of a tool or a piece of governance in the world that can outpace people's online behaviors. But I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from in terms of the record keeping and the oversight. I have seen a lot of businesses do a good kind of hybrid model, a very official decision making. You know, escalation between bronze, silver, gold, for example, is on the official platform, but the back channel, the kind of swapping of contacts, general sharing of information, always kind of gravitates off to WhatsApp. Or its equivalent in other parts of the world.
Okay, all right, good. There's a question from Yusuf here, which I'd like to put to you, because I think this would be helpful to our listeners. There are many challenges of communicating during the golden hour of a cyber attack. We're onto cyber. How do you go about integrating a really good digital comms strategy in response to a cyber attack as part of activating business continuity? Any tips in those early minutes of a crisis? I guess speed is one of them, Tim, but over to you on that, please.
I think that's right. I'm not, to be honest, I'm never sure if I fully agree with the golden hour thing.
No, I think it's gone. I think it's probably gone.
Yeah, but I think clarity in a cyber incident, clarity about the number of people affected and agreeing on what the kind of the maximum worst case scenario might be, in order that you can be upfront with people about the size of the impact. Where this seems to go wrong for a lot of organizations has been to use the golden hour and say, okay, 30,000 people, your data's been lost. And then a day later, actually, it's 100,000 and 150. You know, I think you can always go back later and say, actually, it was only 5,000 or something like that. But getting to a number that everyone feels reasonably comfortable is beyond correct, is the worst case scenario. That is really, really important. And reflecting that in your online comms, you know, is crucial.
I mean, certainly with something like a cyber attack, it is, I'm aware, incredibly difficult, because if you go too early, you may not have the facts, and you may not be able to, you know, and the facts may change as well, the information may change. But also, if you go late, then people will just say, well, you're sitting on the story. You know, why aren't you telling your customers what's going on? So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, in a way.
Yeah, well, to think about it another way, that the speed element here is not just, it's not speed because of digital, because of the speed of social media. It's speed to show care And I think what digital comms allows you to do is acknowledge something has happened really
Yeah.
quick, and then
Yes.
buy some time to get to that number or get to that full statement. But again, feeling under pressure to rush out cause, effect, and solution within some
Yeah.
sort of golden hour or golden week or whatever it might be, that doesn't feel right, and it's certainly not going to help you take advantage of sort of good digital communications. But
And I think we should,
acknowledging stuff quickly up front is good.
I think, yeah, absolutely, and I think we should just say for anybody who's new to digital comms is that never speculate on anything. Speculation will lead you into into deep and ugly water. But yes, yes, that's great. Okay, what's David saying? David says agree with the heads up to staff. Yes, and interested parties. So keep your, particularly in something like a cyber attack, where internal comms are incredibly important, that people should watch out for any kind of phishing emails and so forth. And staff should be kept up to speed with what's happening. And what Simon's saying about speed, what would you consider the optimal reaction time for an incident such as a cyber attack, for example? Our comms department aimed for 15 minutes to start putting out fires. I mean, obviously you have to let the regulator know in the UK within 72 hours, although having spoken to them, they expect to know earlier than that. Tim, any thought about this? 15 minutes sounds quick.
I think 15 minutes is fair. I think that's something that we would, endorse with the people
Okay.
we're working with. But again, that's an acknowledgement that something's happened. It can be, fairly vague at that stage. Hopefully you haven't got too many fires to put out within 15 minutes, externally, I mean, but you never know. Just to go back to the previous comment as well,
Yeah.
I think, yes, heads up to internal comms, that's really good. We were saying earlier, how important internal comms is and always has been, really. But from a digital point of view, you must always remember that once it's on internal comms, it kind of may as well be on external channels as well.
Yeah, internal is
I've got great
external.
faith in people, but if you're running a big organization, it will always leak. So it would be naive to say, we're going to brief staff on this, and then we're going to go to the media a day later and talk to them. Once it's out, it's out.
And I think it's worth making the point here, Tim, as well, that journalists these days, well, the ones I know anyway, if a story is breaking, they're on their Twitter feeds the whole time, and they're looking for people close to the story. And if you're tweeting about it, you can expect a call from a journalist. So that might come as a surprise to some. Just very quickly, just a question there, did you do any work on pandemic? Have you done any work on pandemic comms recently?
My colleagues did last year. They went and spent several weeks with the NHS in the first lockdown, which was a great kind of experience for them. And hopefully we were able to bring a little contribution to the work that was going on from NHS England then. I haven't directly,
Okay.
but obviously I'm a keen observer of everything that different countries are doing.
Okay, that's great. Tim, I'm going to fire a quote that you made back at you. I wonder if you can
Right.
remember making it. You've said that there's often a business continuity gap between preparedness and actually having boots on the ground. What did you mean by that? And do you have an example you could share with us about that?
Yeah, I mean, very simply, this is. I do remember saying this now. I'm glad I remember it. Yeah, this is about that sort of situation where an organization has a plan
Yeah.
and it's beautifully prepared and easy to access and read and understand, but it doesn't really sort of bear any resemblance to the current state of the organization or its capacity to deliver that plan.
What
So
you mean it's not been updated, or it's not relevant to the current state of the organization. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, or in the detail, it can be a little bit ideal world. So it says in the event that X happens, we will publish Y online. Okay. But what about if that happens, if that requirement's needed overnight? Or let's say it's day 32 of an ongoing incident. the people who are going to be responsible for communicating at that stage may not be the people who started at the beginning. They may not be the people who've got the necessary skills to produce content on digital channels. So this is the specifics I'm thinking of in the kind of work that we do. You know, hard pushed digital comms teams are on their break, they're on holiday, and contrary to what I was saying about, you know, government departments earlier, not all organizations have a bedrock of digital skills throughout all their communicators. So suddenly you've got this huge gap in the way that content is prepared and published. There's also, you know, logistical challenges as well. So if you've got an incident, an emergency that happens in a different site, for example, and there's no one there who can take photos, who can understand the scale of what's happening and communicate effectively the steps that are being taken, then you've got that sort of literal, you know, that geographical lag and that time lag between where something's happening and where it needs to be communicated from. And these are the sorts of things that I see as sort of a you know, quite common gap between plan and actual preparedness.
Okay, good. Yusuf has made a comment here. Let's just see what Yusuf is saying here. Just a comment, maybe effectively selling the importance on regular workshops to review your digital comms strategy as part of your business continuity program, perhaps to address that gap. That sounds like a smart idea to me. Yeah.
I'm all for that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, now here's an interesting one from David. Plans are normally huge, which looks like a thesis, but not practical. I've written our 100-page arrangement down to 15 pages. Good work, David, with helpful contact lists. Emergency planning team has radios and vehicles to constantly respond. And this is where we could get into just a brief discussion, the difference between a business continuity plan and a playbook, a crisis management playbook. Are you a fan of playbooks for like sort of cyber attacks or a terror attack or something like that, Tim? Is that something you would comment on?
Yeah, I mean, I am a fan of them in the sense that I think, frankly, they often sound more interesting to people and a little bit more accessible. It's a bit of word of the moment, or at least the last couple of years. You know, have a playbook for everything, and that. I don't mean that in a disparaging way, because if it gets people engaged and interested in a plan or a set of plans, then that can be no bad thing. But I mean, we see this with so much. It's sort of cyclical, isn't it? There'll be a different way of presenting a plan in a few years' time, and it'll be called something else.
Yeah,
I don't know
but I mean, what we're addressing here is a very fundamental difference. So you have a BC plan, which is a generic plan, which should be able to deal with any circumstance, whereas then you have, you know, a playbook that addresses particular specific issues. I mean, I quite like playbooks myself, and I've written a few of them. I quite like them, and largely because they're a bit shorter. And I totally agree with David on that. These massive plans are very difficult to digest. But I do remember being at a conference once, and I think it was an airline conference, and it was someone from an airport told me I was completely wrong and showed me this massive tome of how to get their airport out of trouble. And I did feel perhaps I was a bit out of my depth there. So,
but I think if the playbook is a way of getting into the plan, if you've got a team of people who are worried about cyber or worried about a particular type of emergency, but they're never going to look at the business continuity plan, in my experience, or not familiarize themselves with it regularly, then having the playbook that presumably will plug into the plan at the appropriate places is a way of getting them involved and engaged. And I think that's the most important role that the playbooks have in most organizations.
Indeed. Interesting question here. In fact, Manoj, I may be pronouncing your name wrong, and I do apologize if I am, but he has led me perfectly with this question to talk about tests and exercises, because that's precisely where I wanted to go. And in fact, hold that thought, because here's my next poll coming up, which is all about this. I'm launching a poll now. And the question, as you will see there, because of the pandemic, because of lockdowns and so forth, has the appetite for training and simulations diminished? And there you go, very simple question. What's our listeners, our audience, yeah, they're already responding to this. What's your thought, folks? And I'm going to ask Tim this question as well, because he's all over trainings and simulations. So what's your thought here? Have they been affected? Have there been a diminution of training and exercises because of lockdowns? And we've got 60, few more people to vote, please. 60% of people voting. Anybody else want to vote on this one? I think I'm going to close it down now. Please vote. Okay, anybody else? People are diving in as I'm telling you I'm going to close it. Anybody else want to vote on this, please? Okay, I'm closing the poll. I'm sharing the results. And okay, I'm slightly surprised by that. Yes, people think that training has diminished 30%, but the overriding one, 68%, are saying that they don't think it has. I assumed it might have been the other way around. Tim, you run a lot of training and so forth. How's it been for you in the last 18 months, 2 years?
I think it's been busier than ever, actually.
Well,
Obviously we had a little bit of a dip at the beginning of last year in the UK in terms of our UK business, but that was just people, I think, froze a little bit and were like, well, can we still exercise and simulate remotely or not? And I think we've proven, 100-fold that you can carry on doing, remote simulations and exercises and do those really effectively. What I'm particularly interested in is the number of exercises sort of completely unrelated to COVID, because I think there's a good and well-placed emphasis from lots of organizations on not forgetting about the other things that can impact us at the moment. That cyber, we've talked about, all the reputational issues are still out there as well. So all these things need thinking about alongside the prospect of new variants of COVID and spikes in infection and that sort of thing.
Okay, all right, great. Well, we've got a few points here. Christopher's saying the appetite for training has increased. Good. Just a shame it wasn't the case pre-COVID. Okay, I don't know what industry you're in, Christopher, but hopefully you'll be doing lots of training, because we love to see that. And Simon is saying we've done more exercises and testing because of the higher profile of business continuity during the pandemic. I guess that echoes what you've just been saying there, Tim. Okay, COVID is, Mary's saying COVID has driven more of an appetite for training. I mean, the only thing I would say about this, though, folks, it is going to be a lot of online training, isn't it? I mean, how many of you are actually doing training exercises? For me, having been in crisis management for like 20 years and stuff, the traditional training is, to have a bunch of teams in separate rooms and you run a whole exercise in that manner, as I'm sure you've done, Tim. But now, certainly the training exercises I've been involved with have largely and continue to be online. Actually, I'd like a response to that from you guys listening. Are most of your training exercises done online, or are you meeting in rooms now? Is it starting to shift back to what it was? I would be interested to hear that. What have we got here? Tony's saying impetus is needed to encourage teams to plan and exercise for non-COVID related disruptions, just what Tim was saying. And Mohammed is saying online all the way at the moment. So yeah, I mean, what's your, Tim, I assume the training you do is largely online at the moment. I mean, certainly with your social simulator, that's easily done. Is that right? Am I right there?
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky because that's what the software enables us to do. But actually, this week we're as a team are doing 2 of our biggest ever exercises in person, or kind of a hybrid model. So some of us are on site, some of us are away, some of the client teams are online, can't travel, some are on site, and they are on the on-site stuff is huge. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people participating. So I think what we feel might happen is a better sort of hybrid solution, which is a greater test of a business's ability to respond in a COVID world.
Do you find, I'm quite interested by that answer. Do you find it difficult to run both a hybrid exercise, so you've got people in a room and people joining online? Do you find it easy to integrate both groups of people?
Yeah, yes, I think, but it takes it's a different way of thinking about
Yeah.
roles and responsibilities, phases and shift handover. So I think this is something that is quite interesting, is that it might force organizations who are kind of reliant on, a core team who would just work 24/7 until the incident was over and the fridge was full of pizza and they were just going to power through it. I don't think that's so much of an option anymore in some scenarios. And actually, there's a better solution now where people can be virtually sort of shipped in from other offices around the world to help out in a meaningful way. So I'm hoping that's going to be a better outcome from all of this.
Yeah, I think it is difficult. I think there are challenges, but as Mary says, as we move to a hybrid office, it's a mixture of both. And I think people who run exercises are just going to have to get used to that and find ways of making sure that both people in the room and people online feel part of the exercise and don't feel kind of dislocated from it. Because, hybrid working is not, well, unless something really odd happens, is not going to go away. Juliana, she makes the point. We conducted an organization-wide exercise and did it all over Teams to simulate the current working practices to get our teams used to how it's all going to be going forward, and conducted the exercise in real time, giving them information as it would come through, as opposed to using PowerPoint. I mean, I suppose in some respects it's a bit like the exercises you're engaged in, Tim. Would that reflect your experience or not quite?
Yeah, that's right. So we're able to give people a window, an interactive window into what's happening in the external world, as well as in their kind of inbox during an exercise, but then also do that through Teams so that people can work in different rooms, breakout spaces, and so on the kind of the particular tasks that they're assigned. So I definitely can see the value in exercising in that way, particularly if that's the general strategy for your business. If you are going to stay hybrid or fully remote, then all the exercises have got to adapt accordingly.
Yeah, okay, that's really okay. I've just realized, my goodness, the hour is almost up, and we haven't even talked about your work with the energy sector. So I mean, I'm just going to throw you just a very general question here as we come towards the end. Can you give us a little bit about your experience working in the energy sector, and how does that differ from working with government?
Well, this is the bit that I'm sort of gets me most excited work-wise. I think we were lucky to work for 3 of the world's biggest energy companies, and it's a real privilege to see how they exercise and how they manage their sort of business continuity plans. So the scale of it for me is still fascinating, and it's a neat segue from the earlier point about whether we do these things hybrid or otherwise. The nature of the sorts of scenarios that these companies are rehearsing or practicing means that there's got to be a sort of a physical presence, because a lot of the time we're talking about accidents, oil spills, equipment being damaged on site, that kind of thing. And the scale of it is such that we might be operating on a piece of coastline, hundreds of people in one place, as well as virtual support and actual equipment being deployed as if there was a cleanup operation going ahead. Boats out at sea, aircraft and drones overhead, all actually happening, not just kind of hypothetically. And so that's really, really exciting, and to be in among that and to help people report internally from the scene for other staff around the world, as well as create content that can be communicated externally. That's really fascinating, and to the credit of organizations that do it that way and are returning to doing it in that way right now.
Well, the scale sounds just extraordinary, the amount of people involved that I mean, do you actually have people on oil rigs and so forth that actually part of the exercise? Is it, I've never done an exercise like that before.
I've never done one on a rig. I'm sure they
Right.
do happen. I think some colleagues of mine have done one in similar circumstances, but usually a major port, a major shipping lane, a natural habitat that might be close to an industrial site that could potentially be threatened, is really, it's somewhere. What I value about the experience is the sites are chosen for their risk profile. It's not
Yeah.
just an abandoned lake somewhere, or somewhere that no one knows about or cares about.
Okay, all right, great. Well, look, Tim, we're getting very close to the end, so I'd just like to wrap things up a little bit here. And just ask you some general questions, just make any points that you wish to make that can help our audience. Where do people typically go wrong with digital comms, and what can they do to fix it? And what should be finding its way into our audience's crisis plans that often are missing there? Give us some good advice here from your experience, please.
I think choice of channels really important. We've talked a lot today about Twitter, but I mean that's just not. That's just a bit of a no-show in some parts of the world and for some audiences. Your business continuity plans are usually focused on safety of staff and employees, and the care of your customers, or the audiences that you deal with, and so you've got to have channels that meet those people directly, and that's rarely going to be Twitter, but it is going to be communities on Facebook. It is going to be Instagram in some cases, places where you can reach your audience quickly and easily, and indeed where they can find you quickly and easily as well. So that's one of the kind of common gaps. The idea in a plan that we're just going to tweet an announcement or put something on our website is a nonsense, frankly. It's got to be the right the right channel, and some of that means understanding now what that landscape looks like for your audience, and building a bit of relationship with the places where your audiences go online, the people who administer those spaces, the places where people are already talking about your brand, where you will need to be in the event of an emergency or a crisis.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to start using Twitter for the first time at the start of a crisis. So you need to do a lot of this work ahead of time, Tim, I guess is what you're saying, yeah?
Yeah, and be prepared to engage.
Yeah.
It is a conversation, as we said at the beginning. So when you're in those Facebook communities, when you're in those forums or other communities online, you will be asked some questions and you will need to respond to those. It's not just an opportunity to publish a statement or an update, however well crafted that is.
Just a comment here from Gregory, actually a question. Business, and this resonates with me. Businesses often have years of fragmented, siloed information from crisis events. Any tips or things to consider when revisiting crisis events to ensure that a safe, no blame culture is maintained? Big question there. Just a quick thought on that?
Yeah, well, I suppose one single source of evaluation from those previous incidents is obviously ideal, and as I think as the question implies, not always available. I've seen some very good sort of books produced by some of our clients that in chronological order, on this date or these dates we had this incident happen, these are the learnings, and that becomes the sort of definitive source that gets picked up for future exercises.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of that, and it can just be two sides of A4 or something like
Right.
that. Just with the headlines, who dealt with it, what the issues were. Yeah, I think those are incredibly valuable pieces of information, which all companies should do. They should take lessons from crises in the past. Um, okay. I'm afraid, Tim, we're going to have to, yeah, we're out of time here. Thank you, really can't thank you enough. It's been a brilliant, brilliant discussion. I've learned a lot, and we're getting some really nice comments from people as well, saying that they've enjoyed. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing so many insights with us. You've had an extraordinary career, and will continue to do so as well. So thank you
Hopefully.
very
Well,
much.
thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's dialed in and had such brilliant questions as well. I think it's put me through my paces a bit, which is good. And I'm online, obviously, so come and find me on social media if you've got
Give
other
him a hard
questions.
time, folks. Give him a hard time. No, don't give him a
Yeah,
hard time.
I'm very happy to follow up with anyone.
All right, great. Well, look, that's great. That's the end of today's webinar. I should just say that my next webinar is going to be next month in October, where we'll be looking at the tricky topic of internet outages. And I'm thinking here about the Fastly outage, which a lot of you will have heard about, which caused quite a few headlines and quite a few problems. We're going to be discussing that and many other things about internet outages with some special guests as well. So from that, it's goodbye from Tim and it's goodbye from me. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Bye bye now.